The housing crisis is wreaking havoc nationally. Our podcast discusses how it is playing out specifically in Black Berkeley, California, chronicling the lived experiences behind what people call gentrification, detailing our endeavor for our right to stay and our right to return, brought to you by Healthy Black Families. I am your host, Deb, and this is Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. Welcome. This episode is part 3 of a 4-part conversation with incredible women playing critical roles at Healthy Black Families. This episode will be looking at how they are steering the Healthy Black Family ship. How are they choosing to organize and why they chose those methods? I'm so honored to have here with me Executive Director Wilhelmenia Wilson, Deputy Executive Director Ayanna Davis, and the Director of our board, Suzette Chaumette. So, Suzette, can you talk about how Healthy Black Family hopes to organize the community's input around what equity for Black Berkeley looks like?
Well, the very first thing that we do is Healthy Black Families acknowledges and validates Black people's experiences with racism, not only with the direct comments and affronts, but as a power structure that perpetuates the hierarchies for wealth, education, housing, food access, et cetera, et cetera. And it's done intentionally and continuously. We've talked about this several times in the conversation. And so one of the goals of getting community input for Healthy Black Families is really to create ways for the community's stories to be heard, and then to reimagine what is a fair, just, and equitable society and how that looks from their perspective. And I want to really emphasize that Black people are not a monolith. So there are going to be multiple perspectives that we need to hear, which is why these people's assemblies are so important. There isn't just one way that the community wants to resolve challenges. So we listen rather than applying what we think about the community based on data. And I really want to emphasize that when we do these people's assemblies, we want to ensure that whatever input is given is also implemented and reflect that back to the community so they can see how their input goes into decision making about inclusion, and how to create space for them in whatever new developments are being built. This isn't something that happens overnight. We understand that. Some of these strategies take years to implement, or when we get the input, it might be a very long time before the community sees what it is that is being done, but it's our job to collect the information. We want to make sure that we keep an eye on how racism has played a role in decisions being made, how it operates in our structures and institutions. And we want to make sure that we are keeping a light shined on racist policies and practices, because the dialogue is happening right now. And it's an opportunity for us to raise some of these issues and ensure that the community's voices are being heard.
You know, as you guys were talking and as I'm listening through this and, working on this with you warriors, what comes to mind is how much we're asking of people, right? And asking of people to throw down in a space that's often never been welcoming. So, I guess it's important for me that people know that People's Assemblies is a space specifically for us, and how it's important for us to create the groundswell of community that's going to push up against gatekeepers, for lack of a better word, and create, if Equitable Black Berkeley pushes forward and is successful, spectacular. But if it doesn't, what we end up with is this incredible groundswell of community, right? And we can build something from that.
What we don't want is uninformed, uneducated, privileged white elites coming, denying that racism is a problem in the midst of these people's assemblies. It is, and we have to level set that. The second point I want to make is, in order to be successful, because it's going to include ballot initiatives and things like that, Equity for Black Berkeley has to get the buy-in of all of Berkeley.
It's so exciting. And this then leads me to my next question, which is talking about People's Assembly as a structure for organizing our community. Mina, can you start off by talking to us about how Healthy Black Families is plugging into it as a People's Assembly concept?
Our People's Assemblies are intended to engage the community, to educate the community, and to organize the community to advocate for themselves in this process. So we're gathering information, organizing it, and analyzing the data that we're gathering from people. These are monthly events held on Saturday afternoons from noon to 4, where we start out with a piece of education, and then we move into breakout groups where we collect data on the different aspects. And the data collection process is the same, but our focus is different based on where we are in the process. So we work to give community announcemements about where we are in the process. Right now, we're at a really critical time where we're trying, as I said before, to educate board members about the uniqueness of this community and what has BART's impact on this community and their responsibility and opportunity to relinquish some of their profit motive to allow the resources to really begin the repair of this community. And we're also gathering data for them around the non-negotiables for this community as they move to invite developers to bid on it. This is a very critical juncture. So we're hoping people will come out. We're hoping they'll participate fully and that we will be able to engage them. I don't want to say use them, but engage them to reach out to other community members and have a groundswell of community support as this initiative grows and moves forward. Mama Ayanna said before, the city is an ally, but in order to keep them accountable and inform their work, we have to have community engagement. So that's our whole impetus for holding these people's assemblies, is to create the space to engage community so that their voice is centered in the process of this development planning, execution, and that the community that results as a part of it is something where they can live, thrive, and have family and community.
Thank you, Mina. Ayanna, do you want to add to what Mina is saying about People's Assemblies?
First of all, I want to say that I come to this work, and you as well come to this work with the experience in holding people's assemblies, gathering data, and coming forward with an agenda from the people, having organized the State of Black Oakland, also known as SOBO, People's Assemblies, to build a Black people's agenda. And that work that we did together over 3 years, right, of organizing and strategizing and building. In the next year, Healthy Black Families will be building the People's Assemblies, holding 12 of them, with the focus on the Adeline Corridor community to build awareness so we can have support in making policy and advocating for policy and the full funding of these policies and initiatives as we move forward. This can't be done without community presence and support. We really want to have community come forward and talk about it and spread the word and come again and bring someone with you. It's an ongoing process that is where no other time that I can remember in Berkeley's history, we get to do this work.
Right. And going back to what Mina was saying about centering community, there really is really no work that's valid if the people are not part and parcel of the whole solution. They are the solution, right? So we, the people, it's people power. Again, if we lead, then leaders will follow. And that's key in People's Assembly. It's a question of building equal power to that of those in elected offices through a groundswell of grassroots. And Healthy Black Families is endeavoring to do that in Berkeley. It's so exciting.
I was going to say that's one of the reasons why participatory action research is so key to this process. As I mentioned, we've been on finance committees with finance people trying to ideate around this. We met with planning folks around the planning. We've met with transportation folks around the transportation. And through all of that, we have no problem in identifying that the wisdom lives closest to the experience. The same is true of our community members. They are subject matter experts of their lived experience. And no one, without consulting them, without their help to ideate, design, prototype, and inform measures around this work, is going to be able to come up with a solution that satisfies the needs of the community. So it's not a real stretch when we think about, our professions and, our brick and mortar structures and all of that. But for some reason, the lived experience of people has a declinated kind of assessment. And I think through this work, we are really aiming to position the community at the same level of all of these other professionals as the subject matter experts of their lived experience to inform what happens in this process. And that's really the thing that BART's going to have to understand in order to partner with the community in an effective way. And I'm just hoping that, we can get under the technical pieces of this to the adaptive pieces and strike at that chord of willingness to engage in a different way to meet the needs of this unique community.
People's assemblies are designed to create a community-based, I don't want to call it a think tank, but that's the word that's coming to mind. The communities that are going to be most impacted by the work that we do should be the ones who are driving the work. That's how we see it. So we want to ask them what's most important to them and then listen and use the information that we learn to develop our programs and policies. And it's very important that we build trust early. Often researchers and government officials and people in the higher up positions assume that they know more about the community than they do just because they've studied the community or they know the data or they know social determinants of health. And there's so much more to learn from communities that you can learn directly from them rather than from a peer-reviewed article or some data source.
So, Mina, what community benefits should BART be building into the current development?
What I know is that the BART board is comprised of people from several counties, and their level of understanding of what has happened in Berkeley varies based on their experience with the community. Some have a lot, like Latifah Simon, and others have little to none. So the first thing I think we have to do as a community calling them to accountability is we have to provide some education for them. Putting together currently a schedule of community comments at BART board meetings that happen every 2 weeks to walk them through a series of narratives to help bring insight to them about why this BART development differs from the others throughout the system. So through the People's Assemblies that we're hosting, we're gathering data to document the community's voice on what should be. Our core question is, what has to exist for us to have a thriving Black Berkeley? To date, we have ideas. Ideas have emerged around making the historically Black communities of Berkeley arts and cultural districts so that legacy never leaves the space and that people who come into those spaces will have ample content documentation to understand what the history and legacy of that community is. There's a call for an African American Holistic Resource Center that to serve the Black community in culturally competent ways with mental health services and other holistic ways of maintaining, creating, and scaling community wellness. We also are looking for a continuation of the investment in the historic Ashby Flea Market in a way that really creates like business incubators for small Black businesses in this transit-oriented development that offers them prime exposure to this commuting public that would, enhance their business profitability. And so we're calling for that. And then that really speaks to the built environment. And then there is the repair piece of this. Restoration, repair, repayment, and rebuilding of this historic residential and economic center. So we're looking to create an endowment of sorts that would be governed by the community. So it would be targeted at the areas that are most needed, and those are community defined. And the things that are coming up in those conversations is investing in programs for children, youth, and young adults, pathway programs that lead to viable careers, incubator loans for Black businesses, and there's the idea that's floating, eradicating the Southwest Berkeley systems of food apartheid, as our lovely board director has renamed it from food deserts, is another call to action. And in addition to affordable housing, at our first People's Assembly, and I wish I knew her name, she was a colleague of Alan Doan's who was visiting from South Africa. And she spoke about their transformation from apartheid to a more inclusive social structure in South Africa, and that their focus on affordable housing really created outcomes that were not desirable. And it increased unemployment quite a bit because their only focus was on affordable housing. And, in affordable housing structures, you cap the amount of money people can make, so it limits the economy in a way. In addition to creating affordable housing to help people come back under this right to stay, right to return, affordable housing preference policy, we also have to have an eye on creating job and economic development programs that will support people to secure a living wage that allows them to purchase property in Berkeley and be homeowners in Berkeley. So it's more of a two-prong, and maybe it's a multiple-prong approach to affordable housing to capture as a safety net for the most vulnerable, and also moving people on a pathway to home ownership, which is, the American promise that European Americans insured for themselves and denied to others. So we're just asking with the same fervor that they've assured it for themselves that they come to the table of this reparation and ensure it for those community members who have that as their desire as they work to make a foothold in this community that is theirs.
Right. And we're talking a lot about a BART because that's the big piece, moving on the ground and moving quickly. But Ayanna, are there other local housing policy pieces on the ground that Healthy Black Families sees as important and engaging right now?
So yes, there are, Deb. There are, in particular, we're looking at the affordable housing preference policy that Healthy Black Families, the East Bay Community Law Center, and the city of Berkeley worked on. And there's also the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, which gives tenants who are living in a home the opportunity to buy that home before that home is sold. And we hope that we will continue to build housing preference policies and housing policies in the future with the city and community organizations.
What you're saying brings to mind, Mama Ayanna, some of those finance committee meetings we attended early on, where the city convened a group of financial experts from all different spectrums. The University of California's CFO is on there, Hank Levy, who is the Alameda County tax assessor. So it's some brilliant financial minds coming together to try to discuss this. And as they were talking, it came to me that they were trying to look for solutions to this transformative problem with old canned solutions. And I'm like, what you're trying to solve for has not yet been done. So you have to wrestle at the boundary of this to discover new financial models that will support what we're trying to come to here. And I think that continues to evolve as we look for opportunities to create more inclusive housing. We recently began conversations with the Northern California Land Trust about some innovative ways to do cooperative housing, apartments and condos that allow people to gain limited equity so it doesn't push those units to a market rate level. But those people who invest can gain some equity in their living there. And when they're resold, they can take that equity and move it into more different types of housing vehicles, inventory from maybe the apartment to a single family home or a condo or whatever, and ramp their ownership equity up over time. So I think everyone is going to have to come to this table with those kinds of transformative, innovative, human-centered, impetus, so we can craft the models, strategies, and solutions and design with, as Mama Ayanna and we continue to say, community input at the center, the programs, strategies, methods, and everything we use to accomplish that. And I think it's exciting to be allowed space to define what these new human-centered models may look like.
And there are other housing policies that need to be created or implemented, including emergency policies for houseless and unhoused and homeless population and housing insecure people in danger of losing their homes or their abodes and places to stay. Changes in how the Berkeley Housing Authority operates and implements Section 8 and its housing need to happen. And these are some of the things that we're looking at at advocating for as an organization. Mina mentioned previously in our conversation about the work that some of us are doing together, led by Moni Law, with an unhoused brother that is literally sleeping on the street in Berkeley. And there's so many gaps and so much that needs to be done around housing our unhoused and homeless community in the city of Berkeley, that if community comes with solutions, this needs to be a priority. Housing people that are literally sleeping on the street and dying on the street, and people who are, especially mothers with children and families with children who are at risk of losing their places to live.
So think, Deb, if the same way a homeowner can use Section 8 to pay their mortgage for a renter living in their property, if someone who can qualify for a property, maybe at an 80% of AMI, might get a percentage of their mortgage paid from Section 8. Think about if we could, as soon as properties in Berkeley showed up on the Alameda County tax lien list, as in not in compliance, right? We could get a list of those things and go talk to those families and have funding that, assess what's going on with them. And instead of allowing them to lose their home, put them in some kind of support service program, have nonprofit funding that gives them a gap of time and pays those tax liens forward a year or two. And then we ensure through training, advocacy, that they stay in their home. So instead of allowing people to going downstream and pulling people out of the water, we position ourselves upstream and figure out why the heck are they falling in the first place, and make our advocacy there so that our community shows up more stably and we support them at the point where they are most vulnerable before moving into homelessness.
Yeah. This brings me to the question of how do we ensure our ability to structure equity for Black Berkeley in a way that works for us continually? You've talked about how, and we all know, those of us who've organized, how long-term and protracted this struggle is. So how do we ensure that this initiative is working for us throughout that long term?
The voice of the people needs to be present in every aspect of how equity for Black Berkeley in building an equitable Black Berkeley is developed in the building strategies, in the RFPs, in the initiatives that are built around it, in the funding, in, as Mina had spoken to, the workforce development and the pathways that are developed in what is present in the infrastructure and the building in this community. The community's voice needs to be there in the planning, the design, the implementation and building. And this has to be a consistency. And as people come in, right, as we bring people back under the right to stay, right to return, and as we continue to build advocacy and advocates and community activism around this, we will be bringing in the people. People have to be engaged. If we've learned anything from this time of shelter in place, is that we need each other. And working together and unified together creates the solutions that we need. And when we say this, the whole community, all of Berkeley, needs to educate themselves and support this initiative and this process as it continues to grow and build.
So I'd like to add to that. As I think about this, the term that comes up in my mind is, for the community, is be not weary in your well-doing. When I think about just the lifetime of Black leaders' advocacy I've lived through around this same issue in this same space, and the increasing vulnerability of Black communities, the dismantling of Black communities, it's easy to be discouraged. It's easy to go, well, my voice doesn't even matter. They're going to do what they want to do anyway. And if that's the stance you take, you're absolutely right. I've often been told, Mina, you walk through the world with rose-colored glasses. And I say, absolutely, I did. I bought them myself because I need them. I need to be inspired. I need to walk through my life with hope. I need to think that my effort and the efforts of aligned people will bend, as Martin Luther King said, we just celebrated his birthday, the arc of righteousness towards justice. And even if that's never true, I have to live believing that. So, to a community that has been devastated by COVID, that are struggling with shrinking economy, and lack of resources, I say, don't get weary. Together, aligned, as Ayanna said, in strategic unity, we have an opportunity not only to make a difference in this community with the strategies we're putting together, but also to document what we're doing. We need the community to come out. We need the community to help us do outreach. We need everyone who wants to see this inure for everyone and be to advocate for no income and low income and very low income community residents to have their human dignity honored in this process. We need you to show up, and we need you to stay engaged. We need you to download the city council calendar and get those dates on your calendar, and to engage with us around our talking points at each one of these meetings. We'll be going before the BART board to educate them and evolve their consciousness about what's needed in this community. We need your voices there too, if you're available at 9:00 in the morning every 2 weeks on a Thursday, I think it is. But we'll let you know at the People's Assembly specifically. We also need you to help us define the ways that we need this community to transform to be in support of us. And so coming to the People's Assemblies and giving your input is the way we do that. So I'm thanking you in advance. Come on down.
Written, edited, and hosted by Deborah Hailu, Telling Our Stories program coordinator at Healthy Black Families, Inc. Audio engineered by Adrian Davis and Salim Naji-Ullah of One Hitter Entertainment. Shout out to James Shields of Creative Shields for our beautiful podcast artwork. Akila Shahid, Office and Media Manager at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for the many ways she steps up and bridges our gaps. And Wilhelmenia Wilson, Executive Director at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for bringing all of this together. Casting out the net of Black love in service of all humanity, this has been Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. See you next time.